Good evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about rubbish. You're listening to The Spotlight, and I'm not. Ladies, gentlemen, please take your seats. The Spotlight is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mystery Matt, and you're listening to Season 7, Episode 1 of the Mystery Matt Spotlight Podcast. This evening, as we do every beginning of the season, we are starting off with a murder mystery or something of that flavor. I say that because we've got a different twist on kind of murders or unsolved kind of things. Either way, I'm going to throw it over to Sarah, who is joined by Nancy this evening. And Sarah, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we are talking about the subject of nurture versus nature. And this is Nancy's first true crime podcast. So we're excited to have Nancy. Plus, she brings a certain flavor as she has a degree in psychology. So,
Oh, I do not.
Oh, you do not?
I do not.
Oh,
no.
you studied it, though?
Yes, I
Yeah.
took psych in school, but I have a diploma in social service work.
Okay. So either way,
I have been in the field for 21 years, working with people that have various mental illnesses.
very good. So yeah, you'll add a nice flavor to this podcast. So the nurture versus nature is a long-standing debate about whether genetics or nature plays a bigger role in a person's characteristics than lived or experienced in environmental or nurturing factors. It has become one of the greatest arguments in criminal psychology and whether the lack of loving, nurturing environment or some natural factor in their genetic makeup is responsible. Some may argue it's both, and I do agree in some cases. No matter which way you lean, it is always going to lean more to one side of the argument than the other. So we're going to actually focus on 4 serial murderers, 2 in each category. We're going to talk about their childhood, their behaviors, and how they were after their captures, because there is some really good significances in the differences on how they dealt with being captured and stuff. So our first subject is John Wayne Gacy, who's also known as the Killer Clown. He brutally murdered and sodomized 33 young men, including teenage boys, then hid their bodies in a crawl space under his house and in a river. He was a respected member of the community and a local businessman in Chicago, Illinois. He worked as Pogo the Clown, doing shows for children in hospitals. Gacy was involved in local politics, even posing with First Lady Rosalind Carter. Wow. Gacy managed to go unnoticed for over 10 years, using his business as a contractor to entice young men. He was masterful at blending in and using his sociable personality to come across as an ordinary person, but there was absolutely nothing ordinary about him. So how did John Wayne Gacy become a heinous serial murderer? Was he born that way, or was he made? Questions?
This one truly creeped me out.
John Wayne Gacy?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Truly creeped me out. Like, total creep.
Let me get this straight. We are discussing whether or not a killer is born that way or bred to be that way.
Yes. Like whether or not the factor of his family life and the environment around him has made him into a sadistic, homicidal maniac, I guess, for lack of better terms, or whether or not there was something in his genetic chemical makeup in his brain that made him that way.
Interesting. Did you say it was a theory that came up before or something?
Nancy's about to touch on that.
Oh, Nancy's got something.
So nature versus nurture is like extreme side to side. So basically nature, they're saying that you are born full of, like, when you're born, that's who you are. It's all in the DNA. That your environment and and how you were parented has nothing to do with who you become. Where nurture is the other extreme, where you're born basically as a blank slate, and your environment and your parenting creates who you are.
So when you don't get enough hugs as a child, you might end up killing people. That's just dumbing it down. Completely dumbing it down, right? You know what I mean? Like, if you don't have the white picket fence and the loving parents, the stable home, environment, and you still become a homicidal maniac, that means there's something clearly wrong in your brain. Or you come from a home where your parents beat you or molest you or whatever, psychologically beat you down mentally, you start regressing and feeling aggression towards that parent, and you act out by killing others. That would be your nurture factor. Capiche? Matt gets it. All right, good? Or do you have more?
No, go nuts.
Did you want to talk about Darwin or later?
Oh. You want me to add that piece?
Yeah, add that.
Okay.
Because that was such a good piece that you told me about.
So the nature versus nurture argument was coined by naturalist Charles Darwin's younger half-cousin, anthropologist Francis Galton, around 1875. So that is how far back this goes. And it is quite the debate in the psych community.
That's interesting because that's been around for over 100 years. So like almost 150 something years.
Yeah,
something like that. So I mean that just goes to show that this debate, this argument has been around for a long time, and I don't think we ever will get a full scientific proof of whether you fall under one category or the other. So, but in terms of serial killers, we have 4 subjects that we can probably determine who falls under what. All right. So John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17th, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. His father was an abusive alcoholic who would come home from work, sit in the basement, and drink until it was dinner time, where he would start fights. He would beat his children and his wife. FBI profiler John Douglas wrote in his book, The Anatomy of Motive, that the abusive, unstable life of killers can produce a severe lack of self-worth, self-confidence, which is evident in Gacy's early childhood. His father displayed a dominance over his entire family, asserting control in an already negative environment. Gacy's father would often emasculate Gacy as a boy, calling him names like sissy, worthless, stupid, and effeminate. He would deny his son food and beat him often. Gacy was otherwise a well-behaved child who really just wanted his father's approval. Something I'm sure we can all relate to in one way or another, wanting a parent's approval. He wanted to please and satisfy him, but in return, the attention his father gave him came attached to belts and brooms. John would also suffer some illnesses as a child, which prevented him from playing sports, segregating him from many of his schoolmates, making it even harder to get his father's approval and connect with him. An accident in the schoolyard to his head would be correlated to many blackouts in his teen years. Nobody? All right. All right.
Keep going.
As a young man, he married in 1966 and moved to Iowa, where he was active in the community and part of the local Jaycees. That's the Junior Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if we have them up here. I have no idea. But accusations in 1967 by an underage son of a local politician that Gacy sexually assaulted him would land Gacy in prison. He was then accused of attempting to hire another young boy to beat and terrify the other boy from testifying. It didn't work. Gacy was charged with sodomy and sentenced to 10 years and sent to Adamaus State Penitentiary in December of 1968, and his wife divorced him. While in prison, Gacy adjusted well to the structured life, choosing to keep his crime a secret in order to survive, and downplayed what he did because it is absolutely known in prison, whatchamacallit, the scale of whom
anybody who performs
acts against children
of any sort, you become a lesser citizen even in jail.
You are the lowest of the low.
There is no lower than you. There are people who have shot other men in the face, in the back of the head, stabbed them while they were sleeping, all that kind of stuff. They're above anybody who touches a child.
Yep, exactly.
And rightfully so. I
agree.
You kill a child,
you should
touch them inappropriately, I'm sorry, you're getting those beatings, and you deserve it.
You do. So, he was active in prison, and with the prison Jaycees, the choir, worked in the kitchen and stayed out of trouble. Gacy was able to convince the parole board that he was not a threat and barely served 18 months.
One thing I wanted to put in is that everybody's got that dark thoughts in their head. You're in Walmart, someone's kid's screaming their head off. You're like, oh, just shut the fuck up. I'd like to put a loaf of bread in that kid's mouth. Whatever the dark thought is that goes through your brain. The problem is, most of us know not to act upon that.
We know it's wrong. And we know what the consequences are, and we understand what the consequences are. And I'm not saying that these guys don't, because that's a whole different ballgame, right? So, we just have the better control. We have the sense of control, the sense of logic, the sense of notability.
But then that would bring into question a third. So you've got your nature that you were born that way. And you've got your nurture, which you were raised that way. But then you've got your defective things, like taking a ding to the head. He probably had brain damage, ergo he couldn't logically determine what was a good idea, what was a bad idea. Hey, hi Nancy, I like your pen. It's got a smiley face on it. Jeez Louise.
It's so appropriate for
And
this.
the thing too, like when you have brain damage, when I was, I worked for a while in brain injury, and they have somewhat of an idea of how our brains function, but like you and I could have the same brain injury and we would present differently.
Absolutely.
So they have no idea what's going to change when you have a certain injury or how damaged it is. And when there is an injury to the brain, underlying mental illness will come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in any aspect of crime, if you're committing a heinous crime, whether it be sexual assault or molestation on children or murder, there's obviously some kind of mental defect there no matter what.
Well, and I think with all 4 of these that you wrote about, they all have some sort of a mental illness.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There has to be some kind. But I think you look at it, everybody has some kind of mental issue. But it's not necessarily an illness, but an issue, I think. And it's just how you deal with it or how you're treated for it or how early it's diagnosed can be a determining factor of how you eventually grow into adulthood.
Yeah.
And how it changes. If they know you have a brain injury as a child, they're most likely going to monitor you and your behavior and whether your intelligence goes up or goes down.
Yeah.
And where you fit on certain educational scales as well as moral scales. So I think, yeah, it comes into play.
And so if he was born in the 40s and as a teen he got that, so that means
that's
that
putting
was
him in the 50s,
late
60s.
50s, or there would have been no research for it.
Absolutely. I agree. So, all right. Oh, yes, Matthew.
If I'm quiet tonight, it's only because I'm watching the microphones. I'm doing new things so that we can get better sound quality going, and I've already had the system shut off twice on me. So if I'm quiet tonight, that's because I'm playing backroom editor guy at the same time. So,
all right, okay. So Gacy would move back to Chicago and remarry. He began a small business of painting and doing minor repairs to homes, which would grow into a successful contracting business. Once again, Gacy integrated himself into his community, hosting large neighborhood barbecues and parties, getting involved in local politics and charity work. Eventually, his needs would rear their ugly head again. His second wife began to notice Gacy becoming irritable and annoyed all the time. He started going out at night, his sexual appetite changed, and he had strange sexual requests that made her extremely uncomfortable. She witnessed him bringing young men to their garage late at night and found chains and bondage gear in the garage. When she would ask about it, Gacy would lie to her, then make her feel like it was her fault. It would become too much for her, and they divorced in 1977. His mother knew about her son's attraction to men, but kept his secret. With his wife gone and the house to himself, he was able to engage more in his secret life. He was committing murder during his marriage, but after he seemed to escalate. He would use potential workers who came through his company to bring more men in, and then would select a few to get close to and then murder them. Some were transients and would end up in his crawl space. He would bring them to his home, give them booze, drugs, trick them, sexually assault them, torture and murder them. It's all about the manipulation, control, and dominance over them. He felt powerful instead of powerless. That fear got Gacy off. After the murders, Gacy was more level-headed, able to think clearly. He always had a story ready and would go about his workday as if nothing had happened. Gacy was a wizard with words, and he would commit rape and murder and then the next day entertain children dressed as a clown. After he commit the murders, he wasn't worried about getting caught. He truly believed that as an upstanding citizen in his community and all the charity work that he did, that he would never receive a glance. He was comfortable and believable. He deceived, manipulate, dominate, and control. That's the key things that a lot of these murderers do. And it's his arrogance that had him believing that he would never spend a day in jail.
Can we say narcissistic personality disorder?
Yes, we can.
He hit literally, after I read this that you sent it to me, I looked up the characteristics and he hit all 9 characteristics.
All 9
in
wow.
just what you wrote.
In just that section, or this whole
The
whole Gacy section?
Yes.
Oh, the entire Gacy section.
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Would you like me to read them to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's go.
So the 9 characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder: a sense of self-importance, preoccupation with power, beauty, or success, entitled, can only be around people who are important or are special, interpersonally exploitative for their own gain, arrogant, lack of empathy, must be admired, envious of others, or believe that others are envious of them.
Yeah, that's Gacy to a T.
That I found really interesting.
Yeah, wow. That's good. Like, that's excellent. And I find it interesting that they didn't really touch on that a lot through some of the books that I've read.
That's a newer... personality disorders are a newer thing to the psych community and diagnoses.
Because they're harder to diagnose.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they work a lot like learning disabilities, where it's almost like the Olympic rings. So you have like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And like if you have ADHD, you most likely have a bit of OCD, and it all kind of intertwines and interconnects.
Right.
The personality disorders, from what I understand, are the same.
Huh. Yeah, that makes...
Because if you have one...
You're going to have multiple.
You're going to have little snippets of others.
Yes. Maybe not in the larger scale, but one's going to be higher or more prominent than the others.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the walls would start closing in on him, but he maintained his cool, friendly exterior. When the police suspected him in a missing teenage boy's disappearance, Gacy would give them his daily schedule so they could keep up with him during their surveillance. As with all serial murderers, once their last kill no longer satisfies them, the need to kill overwhelms them. However, for Gacy, with the police following him everywhere, that calm and friendly demeanor was cracking. At 3 a.m, Gacy drove over to his attorney's office and is then there for a while, and one of his attorneys goes down to speak to the police and invite them inside. They find Gacy asleep on one of the office's couches, and the attorney gets the detectives chairs and some booze and tells them if Gacy tries to leave, shoot his tires out. Gacy is officially arrested on December 22nd, 1978. Gacy confesses to the murders 3 times, and during one of those times was about to 15 people. Detectives said during his confessions, Gacy displayed zero emotion. He relished being in the spotlight and being able to talk about what he did. Gacy even drew a map for the police where the bodies were. But despite his confession, he was quick to blame his victims for their own deaths and never took any responsibilities for the murders. Said the boys would try to extort him for sex or money. He told FBI profiler Robert Ressler that he wasn't a monster. The media has made him out to look that way. A monster would stalk the streets for altar boys. Personally, I think Gacy's worse because those young men trusted him. When you work for somebody, you don't expect that kind of treatment, right? So it's, I don't know. For me, if it's a family member, a friend, or a coworker who starts to do those things to you, it's worse than somebody that you don't know.
Yeah.
So he admitted to all these things.
Yep.
And they're like, yep, that's no problem. And then he said that people who are out on the streets look like, how did he find his victims?
He hired them through his company. He hired transients or young men. Transients are basically homeless people, or people who
is a drifter,
or people who move to town, different jobs all the time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Someone who's already not known in the area. Yeah. Essentially.
But there was reports of many of these men missing, because obviously they did have people.
So essentially he is doing that, though. He's not looking for altar boys or whatever, but he's getting people that aren't going to be missed.
Yeah.
Or
he's downplaying these men's importance to their families and to the community. Because he's more important.
That's just okay. Well. All right.
If you could see his face right now, you would laugh.
Oh my God.
Some people's kids, eh?
It soon came to light that Gacy would be careful. Wow, can I start that over again? It soon came to light that Gacy would use careful manipulation to put his victims at ease. Showing them tricks he used while entertaining children. He supplied them with booze and drugs, then tricked them into using what he described as the rope trick, where he would con them into getting tied up. Okay, our neighbors are having a lot of fun tonight. Before his trial, Gacy was examined by 13 psychiatrists, 6 for the defense and 7 for the prosecution. Gacy was diagnosed with borderline personality and antisocial behavior. Gacy vehemently denies this diagnosis based on how much he says he was involved in the community. But everything he did publicly was for himself, and and his way to create a persona to hide behind and to shield who he really was. A mask to make him look like a friendly, jovial, and charitable guy, but in reality, he was capable of understanding and actually caring for nobody. He lacks complete empathy for anyone but himself.
So the borderline personality surprised me.
I think that's the only personal diagnosis they had for personality back then.
Possibly.
It's the 70s,
I mean,
right?
he could fit part of it because you get that it is a trauma response,
right,
to abuse as a child,
and
so part of it
history.
would make sense. But he didn't really meet any of the other criteria that I have seen personally in people with BPD.
Would that criteria have changed though from the 70s to now?
Oh, absolutely, probably, yeah.
If we were to research the evolution, I guess, in lack of better terms, of that diagnosis and the criteria to meet the BPD, I can't say it. I'm sorry.
Well, NPD is new. Narcissistic personality disorder is new.
Yes.
It's very hard to diagnose BPD. So with personality disorders, there's no blood test.
Right. Yeah.
There's no genetic testing. It's okay. There's 15 points and you've met, 11.
Yes.
So this is what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically you're given an antipsychotic. But that's how they do that.
Right. So obviously back in the late 70s, they wouldn't have had that capability, right?
Or probably not that much research.
No, probably not. Because I mean, even profiling was brand new in the mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
So, and being able to bring in the criminal profiling into it, even when they did have a psychologist on board and working with them and doing the papers and stuff, there was still a lot, I think, that they could have benefited even further along, later in 2 decades later. That whole manual that they wrote, the crime classification manual and the sex motive manual and stuff like that, would have changed because the criteria for certain personality disorders would have changed as well.
Yeah.
Right. So, but despite confessing to the murders, Gacy pleads guilty by the reason of insanity, which is disproven via the McNaughton rule. The McNaughton rule consists of 2 elements that must be considered in an insanity plea. 1, the defendant must be suffering from a mental defect or disease at the time of the murder, and 2, the defendant did not know the nature or quality of the criminal act they committed, or that the act was wrong because of the mental defect or disease. In short, the defendant doesn't know right from wrong at the time of the crime. Gacy knew what he was doing. He knew it was wrong, or he wouldn't have had the foresight to hide all of the bodies and cover up the decomposition spell and go on without a second thought. He knew where all 33 bodies were, drew a map, and he even tried the MPD, which is the multiple personalities disorder, route to help facilitate his insanity defense. During one of the searches of Gacy's home, police found a chapter on the insanity defense marked in a criminal justice book. Oh, hang on. Matt's got something.
So he actually researched which illnesses would best fit how he could get away with it.
Basically, yeah, which shows a line of intelligence.
What a dad. Now, did he have a bad upbringing or was
yes.
it? Yeah.
Were you not listening?
Well, I'm just trying to keep everything straight.
Yeah, he was abused by his father.
Okay, so this one wasn't born evil, but it sounds like he was.
We're getting there.
Oh, we're getting there.
Yeah, but you're on it.
Sarah's got this shit-eating grin on her face right now, like
That's
she's
because
up to
Matt's
something.
getting it, and when Matt gets something and starts to understand it, it's neat because that means I'm doing something right. I like that. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
So Gacy's lawyers fought for their client to be institutionalized for life, but the prosecutors pointed out how rational and methodical Gacy was by meticulously planning, executing, and concealing the murders. They believed prison was where he belonged, and they would go one step further. They would seek the death penalty. During the trial, Gacy generally sat stoic and emotionless, but would smile and chuckle when some victims' pictures were shown to the court. In her interview after his conviction with FBI profiler Robert Ressler, Gacy was placing the blame on 2 workers he employed. Gacy claimed they killed and placed the bodies of the young men under his house. He told Ressler that they both had keys to his home and often stayed there. He says he had no knowledge of how the bodies got there. Gacy showed no empathy, no remorse, and refused to take responsibility for the crimes he was found guilty for in court of law. He denied everything right up until his execution via lethal injection on May 10th, 1994. So let's break it down real quick. His childhood was filled with physical, verbal, and emotional abuse by his father. He suffered a head injury in his early teens. He was incarcerated for sodomy of a minor. He used his business to lure young men in by being friendly and helpful with the promise of employment. He used drugs and alcohol to diminish their capacity to have sex with them, wanted or not, then strangle or suffocate them. No blood or noise. Knew how to hide the bodies, and after the murders, he was arrogant, not scared about capture, calm and stress-free. He refused to accept responsibility, blamed everyone else, showed no remorse, no emotion. If someone else did the murder of those young boys, why didn't he tell the police that from the beginning? So thoughts? I feel that he leans heavily into the nurture category.
Yes, but you could also say nature for him because of his father was abusive and alcoholic and treated him like crap, that he could also have been born with those personality traits. So you could either, you could argue either side.
Except for the fact that well, yes, you could, but play devil's advocate here, right?
Yeah.
Except for the fact that his father would abuse the people closest to him, where Gacy didn't do that. He didn't abuse his wife, and he didn't abuse his stepkids or his kids or whatever. He abused and murdered people outside of his general circle, like his inner circle. Mm-hmm. And they were still in his circle, but they weren't in that close circle. Like, like if you murdered somebody, like if your ex went missing or something, you'd be the first suspect. You know what I mean? Like that's your inner circle, the people closest to you. Gacy showed foresight not doing that, and he doesn't have a history of abuse against his wives. A little weird sexual history there, but that's a different podcast, Like if we ever decide to cover John Wayne Gacy, his life, his entire life, and his entire crime spree, including details upon each murder and victim. Obviously, I want to make sure the victims are important. We will see more of that, but there was no history of abuse to his wives or anything, unlike his father, who abused his wife and his children. So Gacy channeled that, whether it be different or not, he channeled it outside of that immediate circle.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I find that if you were abused as a child, you either go one way or the other. You either become an abuser or you become the exact opposite. Incredibly nurturing, incredibly empathetic because you don't want anybody to feel the way that you felt.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he's kind of like
which
in a weird
falls
middle.
Under the nurture part.
Yeah, but he's in like the middle, right? For me, he's in the middle because you're right. He did grow up in an abusive home, so those characteristics would be a little bit ingrained in him. There's no history of what his grandfather was like, unfortunately, and that's where we would need.
But that also goes down the line.
Right.
Like parenting tactics and styles goes down the line. And it's all up to one person where they're like, yeah, we're not.
There's only one person in that family who can break that chain.
Yeah.
One generation, I should say.
Yeah.
And he might have broke the chain in terms of abusing his own family, but he didn't break the chain in abusing others.
Yeah. Did he have kids? Did he end up
I believe he
kids?
did. Okay. I believe he did. I don't know if they were his stepkids or if he actually had kids. I can't remember. But if we, like I said, if we cover Gacy in the future as like a middle of the season kind of podcast, I'll have all that stuff.
Yeah. And to all of your comments about him, there is a very fine line between insane and genius. Very fine line.
Very fine line.
Very.
But he is a prick. Big dick. Like the fact that he got arrested, though, for sodomizing a minor, but not the fact that he touched a minor. It was more about the fact that he sodomized somebody. It goes to show the difference between 1968 and now. Because, sodomy is not a crime now. Well, at least not yet again, because I'm sure in the States it's coming. Because the way things are going down there. But that's a different podcast. Now it would be the fact that he molested or touched a minor.
And that probably started part of the arrogance.
Yes.
Because he got out after 18 months because he was on good behavior. So if I act a certain way and people view me a certain way, I can get away with anything.
That's because he's smart enough to watch the people around him, how they act. He was smart enough not to even tell people why he was in there. And
the fact that he went with a multiple personality disorder diagnosis, because not all the time, but sometimes in studies I've read, when somebody has, I believe it's called DID now, dissociative identity disorder.
Right, yeah.
When they have that, they are aware that there are other personalities in there, they're not always aware of what the other personalities are doing when they're in the forefront.
Right.
So that right there, for him to say, no, I have this, and it wasn't this personality. It was Bob that took over, Julie took over the other one. Like, that's what I thought was really...
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also harder to prove. Well, it's not harder to prove, actually. But for him, he didn't know the logistics of how that worked in the first place. He only, I know of this diagnosis.
Yes, and that'll get me out of this.
Right, but he doesn't know how it works or how to deal with it. Or
and that would mean...
what it displays. Because it displays differently for everybody.
Yes, and an insanity plea would mean that he wasn't responsible and wouldn't have to take the blame.
Yeah.
Responsibility, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's almost like saying I have multiple personality disorder and so do I.
Yeah.
You know what? Oh, no, like, but if you're multiple, one of your personalities also has that? Yeah, take it that one other step. That gets into, that gets messy.
So if you are having sex with somebody that has multiple personality disorder, and they, like, switch up in the middle of it, would that be considered, like, a threesome or a foursome or an orgy?
I think so.
Oh my gosh, this
Be
went
an
down
easy
south.
way to get the sticker, I had a 4-way. Really? How many people were there? Well, lots, but
just 2 of us.
2 bodies. It's like, what? Yeah. Tricky to explain that.
It is tricky, but that's actually a very valid question, I think.
I'm
sorry, to me it's a valid question.
It kind of reminds me of this cartoon that's on Netflix. I think it's called Farzar. And they hire this chick who's like this badass mercenary kind of Mad Max kind of punk rock, right? Well, she's a conjoined twin, and the other half is a kindergarten teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yin and yang.
Yeah. And it gets weird because they share the same lady bits. And then they like designate time in between who gets to use the lady bits at what time. And the one guy hadn't pulled out by the time the buzzer went, and she accused him of sleeping with her sister.
Oh my god.
Yeah, he had.
All right, moving on.
Anyway, yeah. So yeah,
I says to Mabel, I says.
multiple personalities. It gets weird.
Yeah, especially when 2 heads are better than 1. Okay, so how about we flip the coin now to the other side, right? Let's flip the coin. Let's flip the coin. If you feel you want to know more about our next subject's crimes, you can always go and listen to our 2-part series of the Atlanta child murders.
Oh, we're giving this one a quick fast forward?
No.
Did you want a time count?
I don't really care. If it goes over a little bit, it's going to...
We're at 33 minutes.
Okay. So Wayne Bertram Williams was accused of killing 30 children and young men. He was convicted of only 2 of the 30 murders, both adult men. Whether he was responsible for some or all of the remaining 28 has never been looked into further. Personally, I think he's guilty for at least 10 of the remaining cases, but that really isn't the point here. You can hear that on the other podcast. So how does Wayne Williams fit into the nurture versus nature debate? Well, we need to look at his childhood. This one was tricky because researching his childhood wasn't easy. I had to go buy a book. Unlike John Wayne Gacy, Williams came from a stable and loving home. His parents were married until they died and owned their home, had stable jobs as teachers, didn't use drugs or drink alcohol very often. They lived in a middle-class neighborhood of Atlanta, despite many of the other middle-class families moving to the suburbs to get away from growing lower-income households. They were not abusive towards each other or to their only child, Wayne. They supported and encouraged Wayne in whatever he chose to do. Williams was well-educated, articulate, had a slightly above-average IQ. He was described by his teachers as quiet, intelligent, respectful, and a helpful student. He never showed much interest in girls or had many friends. He had interests in music and electronics.
Sounds like a normal upbringing to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you're young and you're a boy, girls still have cooties.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like the more nerdy type because he's into electronics and stuff like that. He might have trouble finding ladies. So, that wouldn't be so much in the upbringing, but more so his coming of age.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's correct. You have anything to add? No. Okay. So, like many of our other serial murderers, Wayne Williams was a loner and preferred his own company. He would often get bullied, but his quick wit and gift of gab would get him out of the situations without any violence. He learned early how to manipulate people in situations to get what he wanted. Williams made decisions to put off his post-secondary aspirations with the support of his parents. They helped finance his talent agent career. Williams was on the hunt for talent to make the next Jackson 5.
Really?
Yeah. It's getting harder to see because of the light. He would eventually go to college briefly, but found the regimented discipline not his thing. So I think it's not uncommon for some of these men to have issues with regimented discipline because they want to have control of their own.
Well, if he's kind of like a geeky alpha, which is a weird spin on things,
yeah.
Right? So that would be, yeah. That's a head scratcher.
It is a head scratcher.
It's like a bully showing up for chess matches and stuff. You know, it's like, sup, bitches, you're gonna get owned, and table flipping and shit.
Checkmate, son of a bitch.
Yeah, and then he punches you in the face or something. You know, like
yeah.
It's such a weird combo.
Okay. So Williams' first brush with the law happened in 1976 when he was arrested for impersonating a police officer. This is a common ruse that many killers will use in order to appear non-threatening. Like for their victims, they'll dress up or have a cop car. Bundy did it too.
Oh, wow.
Those
cosplay.
Yeah, exactly. But those who don't go far will often insert themselves into investigations by joining searches, being helpful with tips, or buddying up to cops at their after-hour hangouts.
Did any of them actually make up a cruiser? I thought I heard one of the serial killers actually had a cruiser.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Oh, we're getting there. Okay, I didn't.
So, but Williams was never convicted, but he chose to keep his replica uniforms, police light, and scanner in his car. He even had a police-type dog, a German Shepherd, which, if you remember, his name is Sheba. Williams lived in a fantasy world to make his ordinary, boring life seem more exciting. His interest in young boys was supposedly to find the next big thing. He had dreams of managing the next Jackson 5, as I had said earlier. One has to wonder if that was really the case. His job as an alleged talent scout would have him out all over the city at all hours of the day and night looking for potential singers. He would hang up flyers in all the youth hangouts like malls and arcades. He even had the name picked out, Gemini, after his own astrological sign. But despite his parents' support and encouragement, they ended up suffering financially. Both Williams and his father began freelancing as videographers and photographers. They would use the scanner in the car to get to fires, accidents, and crime scenes, sometimes beating the first responders, including the police. They would sell their photos and video footage to both news outlets and the police. Williams was meticulous, organized, obsessive-compulsive, self-assured, and non-threatening. He had the ability to blend into the predominantly African-American neighborhoods, where he could move in and out unnoticed. He was familiar with how the children in those neighborhoods moved around the city, doing jobs to make money, and he knew they went mostly unsupervised. In a media interview, Williams blamed the victims and their families for their fate.
This might be a totally different podcast, but I think I saw somewhere where there is a high correlation between people that are Geminis and that are serial killers.
Really?
Or killers just in general.
Hitler was an Aries.
Really?
Yes.
Huh. Because when you look at the sign for a Gemini, it's the
twin.
Yep.
Yeah. That's interesting. I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
That might be an extra podcast. Talk about astrological signs and what they might mean. All right. Williams was smart and careful. He knew where and how to dispose of bodies, allegedly. Don't come for me. He never sexually assaulted them. He paid close attention to the investigation through the media. When news broke that fibers were found on some of the bodies was leaked by the media, Williams changed his modus operandi when it came to his dump sites. He started dumping their bodies in the rivers without their clothes on. He thought of police and FBI as Keystone Cops and cocky enough to believe he would never get caught. Just like all killers, their egos gets the better of them and they make a mistake.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you mean by modus operandi?
Oh my God.
What? Yeah.
Modus operandi is basically what they do what they need to do for the crime. Like, that can change. So, like, you might use a gun for one, but you might use a knife for another. So that can change, right?
Okay.
So the modus operandi, his normal one was dumping them in fields or on abandoned properties or whatever, right? And when the fibers were found on some of the bodies, he chose to change that and dump them in the rivers. A signature is something they don't have to do, but they need to do, like
so
leaving a sign.
Essentially, a modus operandi is he does the same actions each time or slight variations of the same actions each time, which makes up a lot of the profile, actually.
Yes, it does.
As
a signature.
Like, he'll, rape, kill, put a rag in their mouth, tie them up, put them in a bag, put them in the ocean. And those will be the key modus operandi. But some of the smarter ones will realize that they're developing a modus operandi, and they'll change the entire thing to try to continue on with a different modus operandi. So it's a series of operations in which, for some reason, they fall into because it worked the first time and it worked the second time, and it's going to work the third time. Oh, wait, I just made a pattern. I'm going to change that.
Or
now.
They might find a way to better the crime,
so
make
it's
it more
pattern.
efficient. Yes.
Okay.
It's part of the pattern. A signature is also part of the pattern, but a signature is basically something that they need to do, but not necessarily have to do, like, say, staging the crime scene. So you might have a body there, and you don't have to spread the girl's legs and insert something into her, but that
they have the need.
But they have that need to. They have to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that more so goes with like the OCD and
yes,
the obsessive compulsive. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Where the hell was I? Make the mistake. Right. So FBI profilers predicted that he would dump the bodies of his victims in the rivers, so law enforcement began staking out those bridges. Williams crossed the bridge after an officer heard a splash and was pulled over. It was Williams' behavior that got law enforcement's attention. First thing out of Williams' mouth was if this was about the murdered children, and the fact that he seemed nervous and agitated. He told the FBI a story about why he was on the bridge, which would not check out. Police had nothing to hold him on, so they let him go. They planned on keeping an eye on him. The days following Williams' encounter on the bridge, neighbors noticed a change in behavior and not just with Wayne, but with his parents as well. Neighbors noted that the normally friendly family were now either curt in their interactions or ignored them altogether. Wayne and his father would clean up the yard and car and burning stuff on their grill, and there was also an indication that they were cleaning the inside of their home as well.
That's interesting.
To me, that says that, there's a couple things. One, Williams isn't doing this by himself. His father's also involved.
Mm-hmm.
Don't come for me. Oh, he's probably dead. Or B, at least his parents knew.
Yes.
That there was something going on.
And it's interesting that he's an only child.
He's an only child. And the fibers that they found, and this would come out in the testing later, was that the fibers would match the carpet fibers, a blanket fiber, dog hair from their dog from within the home. How often were his parents gone from that home? They couldn't have been gone all the time. Not for 30 victims.
No.
Or at least even 10 that these fibers were found on.
And, would there not be remnants left in the house?
That's why they're cleaning.
Uh-huh.
You clean up and you vacuum all that stuff. You get rid of the vacuum bag, because probably was one of those upright Kirby's back in the 80s, and you have to unzip the bag and take the bag out, throw it out. If you're not a crime scene tech and you don't pick up that vacuum bag once it's on the curb, you've lost evidence.
Yeah.
So the only thing they weren't smart enough to do was get rid of the blankets and shit. Or the dog. Because they can match the dog hair to the dog. Maybe not DNA right away. Not in the early 80s. Eventually they could probably match the dog hair from the samples they took from the dog into the samples that they found on the bodies. They could probably find the DNA if there's enough of it. So there's got to be mitochondrial DNA on those dog hairs, even today, if they were stored properly. But yeah, so they had to be involved some way, but they were never charged or even looked at. So to me, it's fishy.
Yeah.
Like, what are you burning on that grill? Like,
things that make you go,
All serial killers usually take souvenirs of some kind. So did they take a shoelace, a pair of underpants? Eventually, some of the victims were found in the rivers naked. So he had to have done something with their clothing. Right? So souvenir taking is a compulsion of all serial killers. It's a way for them to relive their crimes. So they take that girl's bra that they took off the body of the girl they raped and murdered, and they can smell it or feel it and touch it, and they relive that crime over again. Eventually that fantasy or that crime, the memories of it will fade, and they'll have that compulsion to do it again. And that, of course, they'll take something else, like a pair of underwear or a sock or a ring or a watch.
Is there always a sexual component?
Yes.
Interesting.
Because a lot of the times these guys can't get off the normal way, so the only way they can get off is by exerting power. They get off on the fear. They get off on having the power and the dominance. Yeah. You want to read some of my profiling books now, don't you?
So I'm going to say something that's going to mess with everybody's heads. Apparently, sexual kinks are genetic.
Huh. Interesting.
They can be developed with daddy issues, mommy issues, all that kind of thing. But they can be genetic as well.
Going back to John Wayne Gacy, interesting that you said mommy-daddy issues. Clearly he had daddy issues.
Clearly.
Do you think that might be why he focused on mostly males?
Well, he was what? It was back in the
mid-60s, late 60s, mid-70s.
So being gay
70s.
Was
illegal.
Against the law.
Yes, it was illegal.
And people were killed for being gay. And that was probably his way of living out that he was actually gay, but probably had something to do with why he killed, because he was trying to hide a part of him that he knew wasn't socially acceptable.
Right.
And that wouldn't be acceptable by the people that
I want to
raised him.
revisit this back in part 2, because obviously you know the subject in part 2 that I want to talk about the same thing with. I want to revisit this, so just remind me to revisit the whole Gacy killing men. Yeah. Okay. Matt's telling me to move on. Okay, I'm almost done with part 1. Yeah. Okay, so police had to bring him in for questioning, where he denies any involvement in the murders, and he took a polygraph allegedly 3 times and failed all of them. That's when Williams had to take control back. He needed to regain the upper hand, and in a brazen move, Wayne Williams invited the press into his home to address the allegations of his possible involvement in the case. The catch was they couldn't show his face, kind of like Charles Manson, who would sit high above his followers to hold court, to be bigger than he was. Williams was basically doing the same. Manson manipulated his followers, and Williams was manipulating the press. He admitted that he failed the polygraph and then pretty much placed the blame on the victims and their families. He then said he wants an apology from law enforcement and the public. Williams also spun a beautiful tapestry of obvious grandiose lies. He said he was a race car driver and flew fighter jets in Air Force despite wearing very thick ass glasses. He claimed that he was a victim because the police were under pressure to solve this case, and pinning it on a black man was to prevent a race war. That's also narcissistic personality disorder for sure.
Yes, especially when you talk about the grandiose.
Yeah.
Because, wow.
He's living a fantasy life to make his ordinary, mundane life seem more important.
We also determined that most serial killers stick within their own race, do they not?
Generally speaking, yes, they do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's obviously the odd one that might go out of their race, but he stuck, all of his victims were black.
And
mostly boys, with the exception of 2, but I don't think those 2 girls were even connected to this case.
Was Gacy all just white then?
All white men. All white gay men. Or all white men. I don't know if they were all gay.
Very educational tonight.
Very
educational. I am learning lots.
I love seeing that Nancy's learning, because I keep seeing her face light up like, holy shit, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we're getting a new true crimer teammate
I think
trained.
I might have converted.
We miss Kelly dearly, but we needed to train a replacement, and now Nancy's loving it, so this might work out all right.
This might work out perfectly.
We add some psych in there, and I'm down.
Yeah, I like the psychology part, because I like to understand why they do what they do. That's why I'm into this shit.
Yes.
Yeah. So after he was taken into custody, the FBI profilers began to assist in the prosecution by reading body language of the jurors as well as Williams. They predicted, and by they I mean John Douglas, because he's the god of profiling, they predicted he wouldn't confess, and they were right. But they did predict that his ego and arrogance would get the best of him, and he would take the stand. When he did, John Douglas assisted the prosecution in getting Williams to snap and show his true angry self. When Williams fell into the trap, which legitimately scared the jurors, Douglas then predicted that within a week, Williams would suddenly fall ill in an attempt to garner sympathy. That's exactly what happened, and exactly a week. His behavior on the stand, the fact that he showed zero remorse, and the fiber evidence is what secured his conviction of 2 counts of first-degree murder and is now serving 2 back-to-back life sentences. So let's break it down.
Also very only child syndrome.
Uh-huh.
Because, the world revolves around me.
Yeah, it's one that Matt and I are trying to prevent with our own child, which is not easy to do. It's not easy to do when you have an only child. So you're not doing it intentionally, but when you're trying to purposely not make your child feel like the world revolves around them, it's hard. It's very hard. But I'm aware of the fact that only child syndrome is an issue, and I'm always conscious about making sure River doesn't have that.
We could sort out some kind of custody agreement. I have 3 children. I'm willing to share.
All right. I like Mikey. He can come live with us. Mikey can come stay with us. He seems like a cool cat. All right. So let's break it down. So Williams came from a happy, loving home. Stable parents who were supportive, encouraging, and responsible. Lived in a middle-class home and neighborhood. Good student who was well-liked by his teachers. He's a loner, preferred to be by himself. Caught with police paraphernalia. Was non-threatening, small, though boyish, wore thick glasses. Interested in young boys and male teens for the supposed formation of a music group. Compulsive liar. Meticulous, OCD, lived in a fantasy world. Blamed others for the victim's death, including the victims themselves. Refuses to accept responsibility, no emotion or remorse. When confronted by police, he was nervous and agitated. Otherwise, he's arrogant, overly confident, egotistical, and had a need for control. Oh, Matt's got something. No? Okay. There are differences and similarities between Gacy and Williams, but the biggest difference was their childhood. They were the complete opposite. The only similarities were both crimes were of sexual sadism, and although Williams never raped or sexually assaulted his victims, he still got off on the hunt, the control, and the fear. Killing them was his sexual release. Both Gacy and Williams were quick to blame others, never really admitting to anything. Sure, Gacy allegedly confessed to 15 police and attorneys, but there was no audio or video documentation to prove that. It is in my honest opinion that Gacy was a product of primarily based on nurture, and Williams was a clear-cut sign of nature. Yes, no?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna wait until after part 2 before
You weigh in?
I weigh in on who I think is which way and which way is what way.
Okay, you need more information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just
fair
kind of
enough.
doing the sponge thing right now.
Yeah.
It'll give me a reason to come back for part 2, which is next week. So stay tuned.
Yep.
Do you have a little more too?
Just a little closing.
Alrighty.
So in closing of part 1, there isn't any clear official record of whether John Wayne Gacy and Wayne Williams fit into nurture or nature, nor will there be for the next 2 subjects. These are my opinions, and any opinions given by the 3 of us are our own opinions.
And none of us are certified to give any mental advice, legal advice, or any other type of advice, although I'm kind of good at rolling a doobie. So if you need some advice with that, I could probably help you out.
But for my opinions are based on the definition in relation to severe criminal activity and what I've learned on my own. But let's face it, everyone is capable of murder if we're put in the right circumstance. That's a natural part of us. It is what makes us apex predators. It doesn't excuse it, and it's absolutely not something we should explore. But it is that capability knowing we could, if we were ever pushed to it, which separates us from those who feel a compulsion and those who don't. Those, oh hey, I can and will and I don't care whose lives I take. Those types of people. We see people as human beings, not objects to do with as we please. We know right from wrong, and we know that the punishment far outweighs the reward.
I agree. Don't stab your friends and stuff like that, because...
Don't stab strangers either.
Yeah, don't stab anybody.
Don't kill anybody.
Yeah, that's not cool.
But if you come for my child, I'm not holding back.
Well, then I might... That would that be snapping? Where would snapping fall?
That's protection. Yeah.
So that's not so much a killer or a serial killer. That's more of a self-defense kind of deal.
Yeah.
Gotcha, 10-4.
Stand your ground. I don't know if we have the stand your ground law here in Canada, but we should.
We probably have some variation of it, but probably not the same.
No, probably not. Because not every state in the states have stand your ground.
Like, don't some states have it that if you come onto my property unannounced, I can shoot you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend in North Dakota.
I think Florida has it, and so does Texas. Well, of course, Texas does. They have the most gun population. But
North Dakota, I believe.
and I want to say Indiana or Iowa has it, or was it Utah?
Yeah, some of the states.
Utah and Arizona, I think, have it as well.
Alrighty. So you're good?
That's it. That's the end of part 1.
Stay tuned for part 2, like I said, next week. Don't forget to check out our Facebook fan page. We've got Instagram. We've got a Twitter thing going on.
We got the Tiki Talk.
We got the Tickety Talk thing going on. We've got the Instacart Gram thing going. Yeah.
You can order us.
Oh, yeah. I'll show up right tight. Yeah.
3 easy payments.
Yeah. Anyways, I've been Mystery Matt. Have a great evening.